She begged them to stop laughing. They didn't. The zipper wouldn't close, the mirror wouldn't lie, and the room full of strangers turned her worst nightmare into entertainment. Naomi Carter thought that was the bottom. She had no idea the quiet man by the door, the one nobody dared look twice at, controlled more power than every person mocking her combined, and that her humiliation had just become the most dangerous mistake any of them would ever make. Stay until the end, hit like, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The boutique smelled like vanilla and money, and Naomi Carter hated both. She stood on a small, round platform in the center of the fitting room, arms slightly raised, a corseted sample gown cinched halfway up her ribs, and she could feel the seam fighting her, biting into her skin like it was trying to make a point. The saleswoman, mid-50s, hair pulled back so tight it looked painful, name tag that said Deborah in gold cursive, tugged at the zipper one more time, grunted, and then let her hands fall. "It's just not going to close," Deborah said, like she was announcing a weather delay. "We'll need to order the next size up, if we even carry it." If we even carry it. Naomi heard the sentence land somewhere behind her sternum, a small detonation she'd learned to absorb without flinching. She'd had a lot of practice, 28 years of practice, to be exact, ever since she was a girl getting measured for an Easter dress, and her aunt sighed like measuring her was a chore nobody wanted. "It's fine," Naomi said, and her voice came out steadier than she felt. "I'll just look at the other styles." But the room had other plans. 3 women sat on the velvet bench against the far wall. Bridesmaids for somebody else's wedding, waiting their turn, sipping champagne that the boutique handed out like holy water. One of them, blonde, mid-20s, phone already up before Naomi had even noticed, let out a laugh that she didn't bother to hide. "Oh my God," the blonde said, not quietly. "I thought that dress was a tablecloth." Her friends laughed. Not all of them. One had the decency to look at the floor, but 2 of them laughed loud enough that the sound bounced off the gold-trimmed mirrors and came right back at Naomi from every angle, surrounding her the way bad sound does in small rooms. Naomi's face went hot. She kept her chin up. She'd trained her face for this exact moment more times than she could count. The careful blankness, the small, polite smile that cost her more than anyone in that room would ever understand. But her eyes betrayed her. They always did. They welled up fast, and she blinked hard, twice, willing the tears back down into wherever she kept them stored. "Can someone help me out of this?" she said to Deborah, low. Deborah reached for the zipper again, yanked, and the fabric groaned. "Careful," Naomi said. "It's already not fitting. You don't need to rip it too." "I'm trying," Deborah said, sharp now, like Naomi's body was an inconvenience Deborah personally had to suffer through. "Just hold still. Hold still." As if Naomi was the one moving. As if Naomi was the problem in the room and not the dress, not the women on the bench, not the whole engineered humiliation of a luxury boutique that built every gown for one kind of body and then acted shocked when a different kind of body walked in wanting the same beautiful thing everyone else got to want. She held still. The blonde's phone clicked. A photo. Maybe a video. Naomi didn't turn to check. She'd learned a long time ago that turning around just gave them a better angle. And then, through the gap in the velvet curtain separating the fitting alcove from the main showroom floor, she saw him. He wasn't looking at his phone. He wasn't laughing. He was standing near the entrance in a charcoal suit that fit him the way money fits people who've had it long enough to stop thinking about it, hands in his pockets, posture completely still in a room full of restless champagne flute energy. He had the kind of face that didn't perform anything. No smirk, no pity, no curiosity dressed up as concern. Just attention. Quiet, total attention, aimed at her. Naomi felt her stomach drop in a different way than the laughter had dropped it. She looked away first. "There," Deborah said, finally getting the zipper to release. The gown loosening around Naomi's ribs like a held breath finally let go. "I'll bring the next style. Maybe something with more structure." More structure, code for something built for a body that didn't look like hers. Naomi stepped behind the curtain to change, hands shaking slightly as she unhooked the rest of the gown, and she let herself have exactly 4 seconds of silent crying, face in her palms, shoulders curled, before she wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand and put her own clothes back on. 4 seconds. That was the rule she'd set for herself years ago. Cry fast, finish it, walk back out like nothing happened. The world didn't wait for anyone to finish grieving their own body. You either kept pace or you got left behind, laughed at, photographed. When she came back out, the blonde and her friends were gone, off to some other fitting room to torment some other unsuspecting bride-to-be, probably. And the man in the charcoal suit was gone too. Good, Naomi thought. One less person who saw that. She didn't buy a dress that day. She didn't even bother browsing the rack on her way out. She walked through the gold-trimmed doors of Larchmont Bridal into the gray wash of a New York afternoon and let the cold air hit her face like a slap she'd earned just by existing. 3 blocks away, in the back of a black Mercedes idling at a red light, Kang Tae-jun sat with his eyes closed, replaying the 4 seconds before that woman disappeared behind the curtain. He didn't know her name yet. He knew the exact angle of her jaw when she lifted her chin, refusing to let the room see her break. He knew the precise moment her composure had cracked. Not loud, not dramatic, just a small flicker behind the eyes, gone as fast as it came, buried under a smile she'd clearly practiced 1,000 times. He recognized that kind of smile. He'd built one of his own a long time ago, in a different country, for different reasons, but the architecture was the same. A smile built to survive a room, not to express joy in it. "Sir." His driver, Min-ho, glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "You're quiet." "I'm thinking," Tae-jun said. "About the Lansing deal?" "No." Min-ho didn't push further. He'd worked for Tae-jun for 9 years, long enough to know which silences invited conversation and which ones didn't. This was the second kind. Tae-jun looked out the window as the light changed and the car pulled forward into traffic, the city sliding by in long gray smears. And he thought about how strange it was that in a room full of women dressed for celebration, the only person who'd looked anything like real to him had been the one everyone else decided to humiliate. He'd built an empire on reading rooms, on knowing, in half a second, who in a space was dangerous, who was lying, who was performing weakness to hide strength, and who was performing strength to hide weakness. It was the only skill that mattered in his actual line of work. The work that didn't appear on any business card, the work that ran underneath the legitimate shipping company and the real estate holdings, and the foundation that gave scholarships to kids in Incheon, the work that had put 3 different rival bosses in the ground over the last decade and put Tae-jun himself at the head of one of the most feared criminal networks moving through the Pacific Corridor. He'd walked into that boutique for 10 minutes to pick up his cousin's wedding gift, a deposit on a custom veil that some assistant should have handled but didn't, and he'd left thinking about a stranger's eyes. That bothered him more than he wanted to admit. Naomi didn't go home. She went to the diner 2 blocks from her apartment, the one with the cracked red vinyl booths and a bell over the door that never quite worked right, and she ordered coffee she didn't plan to drink and a slice of pie she definitely wasn't going to finish, because some part of her brain still ran the old math. Calories as penance, food as evidence she could present to herself later as proof she was trying. She hated that part of her brain. She'd been trying to quiet it down for years. Some days it worked. Today, it didn't. Her phone buzzed on the table. A text from her sister Vivian. "How'd the dress shopping go? Find anything that worked?" Naomi stared at the message for a long moment, thumb hovering, before she typed back, "Not really. Boutique didn't have my size." The response came fast, which it always did when Vivian smelled an opening. "Maybe try the plus section next time, LOL. Or honestly, Naomi, at some point you gotta just commit to the diet. I'm not trying to be mean, I just worry about you. I just worry about you." Vivian's signature move. Cruelty delivered wearing the costume of concern, so that if Naomi ever pushed back, Vivian could act wounded. "How dare you accuse me of not caring? I only said it because I love you." Naomi typed 3 different responses and deleted all 3. She finally settled on, "I'm fine, Viv. Talk later." She put the phone face down on the table and looked out the window at the street, at people walking past in coats too thin for the wind, and she thought, not for the first time, about how exhausting it was to spend an entire life being the family's cautionary tale. Vivian was the pretty one, the thin one, the one who'd married a cardiologist and had 2 kids who looked like catalog models and posted captioned photos of brunch that always somehow circled back to a comment about Naomi's weight, framed as a joke, framed as love, framed as anything except what it actually was. The waitress came by, refilled the coffee Naomi hadn't touched, and Naomi thanked her quietly and stared at the steam rising off the cup until it stopped. She thought about this man in the charcoal suit, just for a second. The way he'd looked at her, Not through her, not around her, not with the particular blankness people gave fat women in public spaces, that specific erasure that made you feel like a piece of furniture someone had to walk around. He'd looked directly at her face. Like her face was the whole point. It was probably nothing, probably a stranger who happened to glance her way at the exact wrong moment, who probably forgot her the second he walked back out onto the street. She told herself that twice before she believed it enough to pay her bill and go home. The charity gala happened 9 days later, and Naomi almost didn't go. It was a fundraiser for a pediatric hospital wing, hosted jointly by a Korean cultural foundation and a coalition of New York business families, the kind of event where the invitations cost more to print than some people's rent. Naomi had a friend on the events committee, a woman named Priya, who worked logistics for nonprofits, and had been begging Naomi to come to one of these things for over a year. "You never go anywhere," Priya had said on the phone the night before. "You sit in that apartment, and you let your sister's voice live in your head rent-free. Come to one party, wear the green dress, eat the shrimp, leave whenever you want." So Naomi went. She wore the green dress, a deep emerald, structured but soft, the one piece in her closet that had never once made her feel like she was hiding from a mirror. And she did her makeup carefully, and she stood at the entrance of the ballroom at the Lindwell Hotel, feeling the particular vertigo of walking into a room where she knew almost no one, and assumed by default that the no one would have opinions about her. The room was beautiful in the overproduced way these rooms always were. Chandeliers, ice sculptures shaped like cranes, a string quartet playing something that was probably supposed to be Vivaldi. Naomi found Priya near the silent auction tables and stayed close to her for the first half hour, nursing a glass of wine she barely sipped, until Priya got pulled away by some logistical fire that needed putting out, and Naomi found herself alone near the edge of the dance floor with nothing to do but watch other people's confidence. "You look like you're calculating an exit route," the voice came from her left. She turned, and there he was, the man from the boutique, unmistakable, in a black suit this time instead of charcoal, no tie, top button undone, the kind of casual elegance that only worked on people who weren't trying. Naomi's stomach did something complicated. "I am," she admitted. "I found 3. The kitchen, the side exit by the coat check, and a window on the second floor if things get really bad." A small smile pulled at the corner of his mouth. Not performative, not the rehearsed charm she'd seen from 100 men at 100 bad bar nights, just genuinely amused. "That's a good system," he said. "You're the man from Larchmont," Naomi said before she could stop herself. "The bridal place. 2 weeks ago." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, that she'd noticed him at all, or surprise that she'd say it out loud. "You remember that? Hard to forget the day a room full of strangers decided my body was the evening's entertainment." She hadn't meant to say it that bluntly. The wine, probably. Or just exhaustion with pretending things hadn't happened the way they happened. He didn't flinch, didn't do the thing people usually did. The awkward laugh, the change of subject, the overcompensating compliment meant to paper over an uncomfortable truth. He just held her gaze for a second too long and said, "I remember. I almost said something to those women. I should have." "Why didn't you?" "Because you didn't need me fighting your battle in a room you were trying to leave with your dignity intact. It looked like you had it handled." Naomi blinked. Nobody had ever framed her silence that way before. Not as weakness, not as something to be pitied, but as a choice she'd made on purpose, a kind of control. She felt something unfamiliar move through her chest, something close to being truly seen. "I'm Naomi," she said. "Taejun," he said. "Kang Taejun." "What do you do, Kang Taejun?" "Shipping, logistics, real estate, here and there." He said it the way men said things they'd practiced saying 1,000 times, smooth and slightly worn at the edges, true in every word and yet somehow leaving out the entire shape of the truth. "It's not very interesting at parties." "Try me." "Maybe another time," he said, and something about the way he said it made it sound less like deflection and more like a promise. They talked for almost an hour after that, about nothing important, the way two strangers do when they're testing whether there's something real underneath the small talk. He asked what she did. She told him she managed inventory and supply orders for a chain of independent bookstores, work she loved because it let her be around books all day without the pressure of writing one herself. She asked where he grew up. He told her soul, briefly. The answer clipped in a way that suggested there was more behind it. He wasn't ready to hand over to a stranger at a gala, no matter how easy the conversation felt. He made her laugh twice, real laughs, the unflattering kind that came out before she could catch them and make them smaller. He didn't look down at her body once, not the calculating glance men sometimes gave when deciding whether a woman her size was worth the effort, not the pitying once-over from women trying to figure out how she'd ended up in a dress that nice. He just looked at her face, like her face contained the whole conversation worth having. When Priya finally found her again near the end of the night, Naomi had Taejun's number saved in her phone under a name she'd typed with a small, disbelieving smile. Taejun, bridal shop guy. "Who was that?" Priya said, eyes wide. The second Taejun was out of earshot. "Nobody," Naomi said. "Just somebody I met." "Naomi, that man was talking to you like you were the only person in the building." Naomi didn't answer. She just smiled down at her phone, feeling something dangerous and unfamiliar bloom in her chest. Hope, maybe, the kind she'd long ago decided not to let herself feel, because hope, in her experience, was just disappointment with better marketing. What Naomi didn't know, what she wouldn't know for weeks, was that the man she'd just spent an hour laughing with had walked into that gala with 2 bodyguards stationed at opposite ends of the room and a third near the valet stand, that the car waiting outside wasn't just a car, but a small fleet disguised as one, that the foundation hosting the event existed partly because Taejun had personally wired $4 million into its endowment the year before under a name that traced back through 3 shell companies before it touched anything resembling Kang Taejun. What she didn't know was that the soft-spoken man with the easy laugh had, 11 months earlier, personally overseen the dismantling of a rival distribution network in Busan that ended with 2 warehouses burned to the foundation and a man named Choi Dong-hyun never seen again. That his calm wasn't the absence of violence. It was violence so total, so absolute in its control, that it no longer needed to announce itself. What she didn't know was that he had looked across that ballroom and, for the first time in longer than he could clearly remember, felt something other than calculation, something closer to wanting. He went home that night and sat alone in the dark of his penthouse, untouched whiskey on the table beside him, and thought about a woman in an emerald dress who'd mapped 3 exit routes out of a party before she'd even finished her first drink, who carried humiliation like a second skin and still found room, somehow, to laugh. He thought, I should leave her alone. This is not a world I should bring anyone into. He thought, I am already going to call her tomorrow. Both thoughts were true. He knew, even as he held them both, which one would win. Over the following weeks, something began to take shape between them. Careful, unhurried, the way things grow when both people are quietly terrified of how much they want it. They had dinner at a small Italian place in the West Village that Tae-jun chose specifically because it had no valet, no doorman who might recognize him, no chance encounter with anyone from either side of his life. They walked along the Hudson at night, hands occasionally brushing, never quite holding, the city lights smeared gold across the water. He learned that Naomi hummed under her breath without realizing it whenever she was nervous. She learned that he went quiet, completely silent, whenever a conversation turned toward his childhood, his father, anything before the age of 19, and she learned not to push, the way you learn not to push on a bruise you can't see but can tell is there. You disappear sometimes, she told him one night, on a bench near the river, his coat draped over her shoulders against the cold. Even when you're sitting right next to me. I know, he said. Is it something you'll tell me eventually? He looked at her for a long moment, the city light catching the side of his face, and something in his expression made her chest tighten. Not fear exactly, but something adjacent to it. Eventually, he said, when I trust that telling you won't take you away from me. She didn't understand what that meant. Not really. Not yet. But she filed it away, the way you file away a strange noise in your house at night, telling yourself it's nothing while some older, more honest part of you keeps listening for it to happen again. For the first time in her adult life, Naomi felt something close to safe. Not because Tae-jun told her she was beautiful, though he did, quietly, in ways that didn't feel like a performance for credit, but because he simply never made her feel like an apology. He didn't compliment her size to prove he wasn't bothered by it. He didn't bring it up at all, good or bad, and the absence of that conversation felt, to a woman who'd spent her entire life as the subject of everyone else's commentary, like the most luxurious silence she'd ever experienced. But the world outside their quiet dinners had other plans. It started small. A photo of the two of them leaving a restaurant taken by someone Naomi never saw, posted by an account she didn't follow, with a caption that read, "Korean businessman seen with mystery woman, not what we expected." The comments came fast and ugly, the way they always did. Strangers performing cruelty for an audience of other strangers. All of them suddenly experts on what kind of woman a successful man should be photographed with. Is this a bet? He could do so much better, no offense. Charity work apparently extends to his dating life, LOL. Naomi didn't tell Taejun about it for 3 days. When he found out, Minho showed him, grim-faced, sliding a phone across the car seat without a word. Something went still and cold behind his eyes that Minho had seen exactly twice before, both times right before someone disappeared from a problem permanently. "Don't," Naomi said, when she finally saw that look on his face in person. 2 nights later, over dinner, she could barely eat. "Whatever you're thinking about doing, don't." "They're talking about you like you're a joke," Taejun said, voice low. "They've been talking about me like that my whole life. I know how to survive it." "You shouldn't have to." "No," she agreed. "I shouldn't. But I do, and I will, and I'm not going to let it be the thing that ruins this." She reached across the table and took his hand and felt for just a second how rigid it was, how much restraint was sitting coiled right beneath his calm surface. "Please, just let me have this. Let it be normal for a little while longer." He exhaled slowly, and the tension didn't fully leave his shoulders, but he nodded. "For now," he said. It wasn't a promise to do nothing. It was a promise to wait. Naomi didn't yet understand the difference. She would, soon enough, sooner than either of them wanted. Vivian found out 2 weeks later, the way Vivian found out about everything, secondhand and weaponized before Naomi could control the narrative. "You're dating someone and you didn't tell me?" Vivian's voice on the phone had that particular pitch she used when she was performing hurt feelings as a prelude to an attack. "I had to hear it from Renee, who saw a picture online. Naomi. Who is this guy?" "Someone I'm happy with, Viv." "Is he? I mean, no offense, but is he actually interested in you? Or is this some kind of—" Vivian stopped herself, but not soon enough. "Some kind of what?" Naomi's voice went flat. "Nothing. Forget it. I just don't want you to get hurt. Guys like that, successful guys, they don't usually go for—" Another stop. Another swallowed sentence that Naomi could finish in her sleep. "Say it, Vivian. I'm not trying to be cruel, Naomi. I'm trying to protect you. People are already saying things online. I just don't want you to be the punchline again." Again. As if Naomi's entire existence was a recurring joke the family had simply learned to tolerate. "I have to go," Naomi said, and hung up before Vivian could finish whatever sentence was coming next, and she sat on the edge of her bed for a long time afterward, phone in her lap, feeling the old familiar ache settle into her chest like weather she'd learned to live with. She didn't cry. She was getting better at that, at absorbing the blow without letting it knock her all the way down. But something in her had started to shift, slowly, almost without her noticing. A small, stubborn voice that hadn't existed a few months earlier had started speaking up somewhere underneath all the old noise. "Maybe they're wrong about you. Maybe they've always been wrong about you." She didn't fully believe it yet, but she was starting to want to. The rumors online grew louder over the following month, the way these things always did, feeding on each other, mutating, growing teeth. Someone created a meme. Someone wrote a long, smug thread analyzing Naomi's body in clinical, cruel detail next to a blurry photo of Taejun, asking what could possibly explain the pairing besides money, manipulation, or some kind of bet among rich friends. High society women who had never spoken a single word to Naomi in her life began speaking about her at other parties as though they knew her intimately. That poor woman, bless her heart, doesn't she realize he's just using her for some kind of joke? None of them knew the truth. None of them had any idea what kind of man they were quietly mocking from the safety of their gold-trimmed ballrooms. Taejun absorbed every story Naomi told him about it with a stillness that frightened her a little, a patience that felt less like calm and more like something being carefully, deliberately stored away. "You're saving something up," she said to him one night, 3 months into whatever this had become between them, sitting across from him in his penthouse kitchen while he poured her tea she hadn't asked for but somehow always wanted. I can feel it. You're keeping score. I'm not a man who forgets who hurts the people I love, he said simply, not looking up from the kettle. The people I love. He'd never said it that plainly before. Naomi's breath caught. Taejun. He looked up. Who are you really? She asked. Not the shipping company answer, not the real estate answer. I've watched you for months now. The way men look at you on the street, actual fear, not respect, fear. The way restaurant owners comp our entire meal and won't take your money. The way you have a driver who's basically a bodyguard, who you pretend is just a driver. I'm not stupid. Something doesn't add up. For a long moment, he said nothing. He set the kettle down. He came around the kitchen island and stood close enough that she had to tilt her head up to keep looking at him, and his face, usually so composed, carried something raw in it now, something almost like fear. If I tell you, he said quietly, there's no version of you where you get to walk away and pretend you don't know. You either accept all of me or none of me. There's no middle version. Naomi's heart was hammering. Every instinct she had, every old, well-earned instinct built from a lifetime of disappointment, told her to be careful, told her this was the moment where the story turned, where the man who'd made her feel safe revealed himself to be something else entirely, the way every good thing in her life eventually did. Tell me, she said anyway, because some stubborn, hopeful part of her had decided, weeks ago without her permission, that this man was worth the risk. Taejun exhaled, slow and shaking, and opened his mouth to answer. And that was the exact moment his phone began ringing. Not the regular ringtone, but a sharp, specific alert he'd programmed for exactly one purpose. An alert that only ever meant one thing. His face changed instantly. The vulnerability vanished, replaced by something hard and immediate. I need to take this, he said, already moving toward the hallway, phone pressed to his ear, voice dropping into rapid, low Korean that Naomi couldn't follow, but whose tone she understood completely. Controlled fury, the kind of voice men use when something has gone very wrong, and they intend to fix it by any means necessary. Naomi sat alone in the kitchen, tea going cold in her hands, staring at the space where he'd been standing a moment earlier, about to finally tell her the truth. She didn't know it yet, but somewhere across the city, a name had just surfaced on a wiretapped line. A name belonging to a rival organization that had recently discovered exactly who Kang Taejun was spending his nights with, and exactly how useful that information might be. The quiet, careful world Naomi had built with this man for the last 3 months was about to collide, violently, with the world he'd spent his entire adult life trying to keep separate from anything good. And neither of them had any idea how little time they had left before that collision arrived. Naomi sat alone in that kitchen for 11 minutes before Taejun came back. She counted them. She didn't mean to, but her brain did it anyway, the way it counted everything when she was anxious. Steps to the door, calories on a label, seconds since someone laughed at her. 11 minutes of low, urgent Korean bleeding through the hallway wall, his voice dropping into registers she'd never heard from him before. Flat and clipped and final sounding, the cadence of a man giving orders rather than asking questions. When he came back into the kitchen, his tie was loosened, even though she didn't remember him touching it, and there was a sheen of sweat at his hairline that hadn't been there before. I have to go, he said. Taejun, tonight, now. He was already reaching for his jacket on the back of the chair, and his hands, she noticed, weren't quite steady. Not shaking, exactly. Restrained. Like a man holding something down with both fists. You were about to tell me something, Naomi said, standing up so fast the tea sloshed over the rim of her cup and onto her wrist. She barely felt it. You said no version where I get to walk away not knowing. You don't get to almost tell me and then just leave. I know what I said. Then say it. I can't. Not right now. Not like this. He looked at her, and for 1 second the mask cracked again. The same raw thing she'd seen 10 minutes earlier, except now it had fear mixed into it, a fear she'd never once seen on his face in 3 months of knowing him. Naomi, listen to me. I need you to go home tonight. Lock your door. Don't open it for anyone you don't recognize, not even if they say my name. Her stomach dropped through the floor. What is happening right now? I'll explain everything, I promise you that. Just not tonight. You keep saying that. You keep saying eventually. You keep saying not tonight. You keep saying when I trust you won't run. And every single time something happens and the conversation gets postponed again, and I'm starting to think there is no version of this where you actually tell me anything. Her voice cracked on the last word, and she hated that it cracked, hated that after everything, after Vivian, after Deborah and her zipper, after a lifetime of swallowing her own feelings to keep her room comfortable, she still couldn't get through one hard conversation without her voice betraying her. There's a version, Taejun said, low. I swear there's a version, but if I tell you the wrong way, at the wrong time, it gets both of us killed. Do you understand that? Killed. Not embarrassed, not heartbroken, dead. The word landed in the kitchen like a dropped glass. Naomi stared at him. Somewhere in the back of her mind, all the small details she'd been quietly cataloging for months. The driver who flinched at sudden movement near the car, the restaurant owners who wouldn't take his money, the way certain men on certain streets crossed to the other side without ever once looking at his face. All of it clicked into a shape she didn't want to see, but couldn't unsee anymore. Who are you? She said again, quieter this time, no longer demanding, just asking. Someone who is trying very hard not to lose you tonight, he said. Please, go home. I'll call you the second I can. He kissed her forehead, quick, almost desperate, his lips pressed there a half-second too long like he was trying to memorize the feeling of it. And then he was gone, the elevator doors closing on his back before she could form another sentence. Naomi stood alone in his kitchen, in his penthouse, with his tea going cold on the counter and his unfinished confession hanging in the air like smoke that hadn't cleared yet, and she felt something she hadn't let herself feel in months. Fear. Real fear. Not the social kind, not the kind that came from a stranger's laughter or a sister's careless cruelty. The kind that lived in your spine. Taejun didn't go to a meeting room. He went to a warehouse near the East River that his company used officially for cold storage and unofficially for everything else. And by the time he walked through the loading bay doors, 6 of his men were already standing in a loose half circle around a folding table. And on that table sat a laptop open to a single grainy photo. The photo showed Naomi, leaving her apartment building 2 days earlier, caught from across the street. The angle low and careless in the way surveillance photos always were when the person taking them didn't care about being elegant about it. Where did this come from? Taejun said. His voice didn't rise. It never rose. That was the thing about him that scared people more than yelling ever could. The volume stayed level no matter what was underneath it. A man named Sang Woo, his second, the only person in the room who could meet his eyes without flinching, slid a second printout across the table. Forwarded through a burner account routed through 3 proxies before it landed in an inbox we monitor inside the Cho organization. Whoever sent it wanted us to find it. It wasn't hidden well. It was placed. The Cho organization is supposed to be finished, Taejun said. I dismantled their northern routes 11 months ago. Their routes? Yes. Not all of their people. Sangwoo's jaw tightened. Donghyun's younger brother survived Busan. We confirmed it 3 weeks ago and didn't want to bring it to you until we had something solid. He's been in the country for 2 months, quietly, building something. Taejun's hands, resting flat on the folding table, went very still. You knew for 3 weeks, he said. We were confirming. You knew Donghyun's brother was in my city for 3 weeks, and you let me keep having dinner with her like there was nothing to worry about. His voice still hadn't risen, but something underneath it had changed temperature completely, gone glacial in a way that made 2 of the younger men in the room take an instinctive half-step back. While I was telling her she could trust me to keep her safe. Sir, we didn't have proof of intent. You have proof now. Taejun turned the laptop slightly so the photo faced the whole room. This is intent. This is a man telling me he knows exactly what I care about, exactly where she lives, exactly when she leaves her building. This isn't surveillance. This is a calling card. Nobody in the room said anything for a long moment. The warehouse was cold, the kind of cold that lived permanently in concrete buildings near water, and Taejun could hear the river somewhere outside, slow and indifferent to everything happening inside these walls. What do you want to do? Sang-woo finally asked. I want her moved tonight, Taejun said. New building, new name on the lease, security inside the hour. And I want every person connected to Donghyun's brother identified by morning. Every supplier, every safe house, every cousin who ever lent him a couch. And the woman herself? Does she know what she's being moved into? Taejun's jaw flexed. No, he said. Not yet. Sir, with respect, this came from a younger man near the back, barely 30, one of the newer additions to the inner circle, a man named June who'd earned his place through loyalty rather than seniority, and sometimes mistook loyalty for license to speak freely. If she finds out you moved her without telling her why, that's not protection, that's control. Women don't always thank you for that kind of thing. The room went silent in a different way this time, the kind of silence that happens right before someone decides whether a comment was insubordination or just honesty spoken at the wrong volume. Taejun looked at June for 3 full seconds. You're right, he said finally, and the tension in the room broke slightly, audibly, several men exhaling at once. Which is exactly why I'm going to tell her everything. Tonight, if I can. Tomorrow, if I can't. He closed the laptop. But she moves either way. I'm not negotiating her safety for her comfort with the process. She can be angry at me for protecting her. She doesn't get to be dead because I cared more about her feelings than her life. He left the warehouse 15 minutes later with 3 new instructions issued and a knot in his chest that hadn't loosened once since the phone rang in his kitchen. Naomi didn't sleep that night. She sat on her couch with every light in the apartment on, phone clutched in her hand, replaying the word killed over and over until it lost all its shape and became just a sound, a meaningless noise that used to mean something. Around 1 a.m., her phone buzzed. Taejun, I'm sending 2 people to your building. They'll be in the lobby by 1:30. Let them in if they show you this code. Greenfield. Don't open the door for anyone else, no matter what they say. Naomi stared at the message for a long time before typing back. Naomi, who are you sending? Why do I need a code word like I'm in a spy movie? Taejun, I'll explain everything in person, tomorrow, I promise. Right now I need you to trust me on this one thing. Naomi, you keep asking me to trust you and giving me nothing to trust you with. There was a long pause before the next message came through, long enough that Naomi watched the 3 dots appear and disappear twice. Taejun, I know, I'm sorry, please just let them in. She did. 2 men showed up at 1:28 a.m., both broad-shouldered, both dressed like ordinary security guards in dark jackets with no visible logo, both polite in a clipped professional way that felt rehearsed rather than warm. One of them, the older of the 2, gave her the code word the moment she opened the door a crack on the chain. Greenfield, he said. Ma'am, we're just going to be in the hallway tonight. You don't need to talk to us. You don't need to do anything except live your normal night. We're just a precaution. A precaution against what? Naomi said. The man's eyes flicked just barely toward his partner, and that flicker told Naomi more than any sentence could have. They weren't going to answer that question. They'd been told not to. She closed the door, locked it, and slid down against it until she was sitting on her own kitchen floor, knees pulled up to her chest, staring at the ceiling, feeling the particular vertigo of realizing that the safest she'd felt in years had been built on the same foundation as whatever was making her feel unsafe right now. She thought about calling Vivian. The thought lasted exactly as long as it took to remember the last conversation they'd had, Vivian's voice dripping with that performative concern. People are already saying things online. I just don't want you to be the punchline again. And Naomi decided she would rather sit alone on her kitchen floor at 2 a.m. than hear her sister turn this into more proof that Naomi had made a foolish, desperate choice. She thought about calling Priya instead. She got as far as opening the contact before she put the phone down. What would she even say? My boyfriend has bodyguards outside my apartment, and he won't tell me why, and I think he might be a criminal, and I think I might already love him too much to care. She didn't sleep. She watched the sun come up through her living room window, gray and reluctant, the city outside slowly waking up to a day that, for her, had never actually ended. Taejun came to her apartment at 9 the next morning, alone this time. No Minho waiting downstairs, no visible security trailing him. He looked like he hadn't slept either. The same suit from the night before, slightly rumpled now, dark circles under his eyes that made him look, for the first time since Naomi had met him, like an ordinary tired man instead of someone perpetually composed. She let him in without a word and sat down on the couch, arms crossed, waiting. He didn't sit. He stood in the middle of her living room, hands in his pockets, and looked at her for a long moment before he spoke. My family runs an organization in Seoul, he said. It started 3 generations ago as a labor syndicate protecting dock workers from being exploited by shipping companies. It's not that anymore. It controls shipping routes, real estate development, certain financial channels, and yes, things that are illegal. Smuggling, enforcement, things I'm not going to dress up as something prettier than what they are. Naomi didn't move, didn't blink. You're in the mafia, she said. It came out flat, almost clinical, the way people sound when they're testing whether a sentence is real by saying it out loud. I am the head of it, Taejun said. Not a soldier, not a lieutenant. The head. The room was very quiet. For how long? Naomi finally asked. 11 years. My father died when I was 24. I wasn't ready. I became ready very fast, or I didn't survive the year. And the shipping company, the real estate, the foundation that funds children's hospitals. Naomi's voice was climbing now, not loud, but tight, strained at the edges. All of that's real? All of it's real. It's also cover. Both things are true at the same time. That's how this works. How is that how anything works? Naomi stood up now, finally, the stillness she'd been holding for the last several minutes breaking apart. You can't just be two completely different people and call them both real. One of them has to be the lie. They're not lies, Naomi. They're both me. The man who funds a children's hospital and the man who runs an organization that's killed people. Those aren't two separate men wearing the other one as a disguise. I am both of those things. I've made peace with that a long time ago, because I had to, because the alternative was losing my mind or losing my life. Killed people, Naomi repeated, very quietly. You said killed people. Taejun didn't look away from her. Yes, he said. You. Personally. A pause, longer than the others. Twice. With my own hands. Many more times by my order. His voice didn't waver, but something in his face had gone very still, the careful stillness of a man bracing for a blow he believed he deserved. I'm not going to lie to you about it now after everything. I'd rather you hate me for the truth than love me for something I made up. Naomi sat back down. Her legs didn't feel entirely capable of holding her up anymore. Why are you telling me this now? She said. Why last night? Why the rush? Why the bodyguards in my hallway? Because a man named Choi Min-jae found out about you. His older brother used to run a rival organization. I ended that organization 11 months ago, the way these things end. Completely. Permanently. His brother is gone. Minji survived, and apparently he spent the last year deciding the best way to hurt me is to find the one person I actually care about and use her against me. Taejun's jaw worked. He's had eyes on you for at least 2 days. Maybe longer. I should have told you about my life the moment I realized what I was feeling for you, before it ever got to this point, because now you're not finding out because I trusted you enough to tell you. You're finding out because I have no other choice left. Naomi felt something crack open in her chest, something that had nothing to do with fear anymore. So if there'd been no threat, she said, if nobody had found me, would you have ever told me? Or would I have just kept dating a stranger wearing your face for the rest of my life? I don't know, Taejun said, and the honesty of that answer hurt more than a confident lie would have. I want to tell you I would have found the courage eventually. I genuinely don't know if that's true. The silence after that sat between them like something physical, something with weight and edges. I need you to leave, Naomi said finally. Naomi, not forever. I'm not saying forever. I need to be alone with this. You just told me you've killed 2 people with your own hands, and there's a man out there who knows where I live because of you, and I have spent my entire life being the person other people use to feel better about their own choices, and right now I genuinely cannot tell whether being with you is the bravest thing I've ever done or the stupidest. Her voice cracked again, and this time she let it, too exhausted to fight it down. Please, just go. Let me think. Taejun looked at her for a long moment, and she watched something in his face that looked almost like physical pain, a flinch that started somewhere behind his eyes and worked its way out into the set of his jaw. The men in the hallway stay, he said. Whatever you decide about us, that's not negotiable. You're not safe right now, regardless of what you decide to feel about me. Fine. He left. Naomi heard the door close, heard the low murmur of him saying something to the men still posted in the hallway. And then she was alone again, in the silence she'd asked for, surrounded by a decision she had absolutely no idea how to make. Vivian called that afternoon, and Naomi, raw, exhausted, scraped down to nothing, answered without thinking it through. "I need to talk to someone," Naomi said, before Vivian could even finish her hello, "and I don't have anyone else right now." Something in Naomi's voice must have registered because Vivian's tone shifted immediately, the performative concern dropping away into something that sounded, for once, like real worry. "What happened? Naomi, are you okay?" Naomi told her. "Not all of it. Not the part about the bodies, not the names, not the specifics. But enough. The organization. The danger. The bodyguards in her hallway." By the time she finished, she was crying. The kind of crying she usually reserved for those private 4-second windows behind dressing room curtains. Except now there was no curtain, no time limit, just raw, exposed grief pouring out of her into the phone. Vivian was quiet for a long moment. "You need to end this," Vivian finally said. "Right now. Tonight. Naomi, this isn't a man with a complicated job. This is a criminal. This is dangerous. This could get you killed." "I know that, Viv. I'm not stupid. I just told you exactly how dangerous it—" "Then why are you even considering staying?" Vivian's voice climbed, sharp now, the worry curdling fast into something more familiar, more comfortable for her. Judgment. "I swear to God, Naomi, this is exactly what I've been afraid of since this whole thing started. You're so desperate to feel wanted that you'll overlook literally anything, even the fact that the man might be a murderer, just because he's the first person to ever pay attention to you." "Don't!" Naomi said, voice shaking. "Don't do that. Don't turn this into another chapter of poor, desperate Naomi, settling for whatever scraps of attention she can get. I'm not trying to be cruel. I'm trying to protect you. You're always trying to protect me, Vivian. That's your favorite excuse for cruelty. You've been using it my entire life. I just worry about you. I just don't want you to be the punchline. You don't worry about me. You worry about how I reflect on you. You've spent 30 years making sure everyone in this family knows you're the pretty one, the successful one, the one who got it right, and you need me to stay the cautionary tale so the comparison keeps working in your favor." "That is not fair." "It's the fairest thing I've said to you in years." Naomi was standing now, pacing the small living room, the words coming out faster than she could stop them, years of swallowed responses finally breaking the surface. "You laughed at my dress at Larchmont. Don't even bother denying it. Renee told me everything. You were there with your stupid friends and you let them mock me and you said nothing, and then you had the nerve to text me asking how dress shopping went, like you weren't part of why it went so badly." Silence on the other end of the line. A long, guilty silence. "I didn't laugh," Vivian finally said, quieter now. "You didn't stop them either." "What was I supposed to do, Naomi? Make a scene?" "Yes!" Naomi's voice cracked on the word, raw and furious. "Yes, Vivian, that's literally what you're supposed to do when someone humiliates your sister in front of you. You're supposed to make a scene. You're supposed to be on my side for once in your life, instead of just managing your own embarrassment about having a sister my size." "That's not—" "It is. It's exactly that. And I'm done pretending it isn't, because right now I have actual life and death problems, Vivian, real ones, and you're still finding a way to make this conversation about whether I'm an embarrassment to you." Naomi's breath was coming fast now, ragged. "I called you because I needed someone, and within 5 minutes you turned my crisis into evidence for your favorite theory, which is that I'm too desperate and too pathetic to deserve good things happening to me." "I never said pathetic. You didn't have to. You've been saying it my whole life without the word. I heard it anyway." Naomi hung up before Vivian could answer, hands shaking so hard she nearly dropped the phone, and she stood in the middle of her living room breathing like she'd just run somewhere, chest heaving, years of unspoken resentment finally loose in the air where she couldn't take it back. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like surgery without anesthesia, necessary and agonizing and impossible to undo. 3 days passed in a strange, suspended quiet. Taejun didn't push. He texted once a day. "Thinking of you." No pressure, then the men stay regardless, and otherwise gave her exactly the space she'd asked for, which somehow made the decision harder rather than easier, because a lesser man would have shown up uninvited, would have tried to argue his way back into her good graces, and his restraint felt like one more piece of evidence for a column she hadn't decided yet whether to trust. She went to work. She managed inventory, fielded calls from distributors, smiled at customers in the bookstore where she sometimes covered shifts when they were short-staffed, and the entire time some part of her brain stayed locked on a loop. Killed people, twice, with my own hands, turning the words over and over like a stone she couldn't put down. On the fourth night, she called him. "I'm not saying I'm okay with all of it," she said the second he picked up. "I'm not saying I understand it, or that I've made peace with it, or that I'm not terrified." "Okay," he said carefully, like he was holding his breath. "But I keep thinking about something you said, about how the man who funds the children's hospital and the man who's done terrible things aren't two different people wearing each other as a disguise. They're just both you." She closed her eyes. "I've spent my whole life being told I'm not allowed to be more than one thing either. Not allowed to be smart and fat. Not allowed to be funny and fat. Everyone always wants to flatten me down into the one simple story that's easiest for them to laugh at. And I think some part of me understood you from the very first second I saw you in that boutique, because you looked at me like I was a whole person instead of a punchline. And maybe that's because you already knew what it costs to be more than one thing at once." Taejun was quiet for a long moment on the other end of the line. "I'm not asking you to forgive what I've done," he said finally. "I'm not even sure I've forgiven myself for all of it. But I'm asking you to let me keep trying to be someone worth choosing, even with everything you know now." "I need ground rules," Naomi said. If I'm doing this, I need honesty, real honesty, even when it's ugly. I don't need to know every detail of your business. I don't want blood on my hands even secondhand, but I will not be lied to again. Not even to protect me. Especially not to protect me." "Agreed. And I need you to actually deal with whatever's happening with this Min Jae person. I can't live with bodyguards in my hallway forever, wondering when the other shoe drops." "I'm working on it," he said. "Faster now, since I have a reason worth working faster for." Naomi exhaled, long and slow, the first full breath she felt like she'd taken in days. "Okay," she said. "Okay, come over. Let's talk, really talk this time." He arrived 20 minutes later, and this time, when she opened the door, neither of them said anything for a moment. Just stood there in the doorway, looking at each other, two people who'd both spent their entire lives building careful armor and had somehow, against every reasonable instinct, decided to lower it for each other anyway. "I have something else to tell you," he said, before he'd even fully stepped inside. "Something that happened this afternoon. I was going to wait until tomorrow, but you said no more delays, so..." Naomi's stomach tightened. "Tell me." Min Jae sent a message, through a channel we monitor. Not to me directly, to a society columnist who's covered the gala circuit for years. He's offering information about you, about us, framed as gossip, but it's bait. He wants to draw both of us into a public setting, somewhere with cameras, somewhere he can either embarrass you in front of everyone or use the chaos to get close enough to do something worse. What kind of setting? Taejun's jaw tightened. There's a benefit gala in 9 days. The same kind of circle as the one where we met. Tickets have already been sold to half of New York's old money, the kind of people who've spent the last month mocking you online without ever meeting you in person. He met her eyes. I think he's going to be there. I think he's going to try to use that room, full of people who already think you're a joke, to make his move. Naomi felt something cold slide down her spine. But underneath the fear, something else stirred too. Something sharper. Something that had been quietly accumulating for months under every laugh, every comment, every performance of concern, that was really contempt. Then we go, she said. Taejun's eyes snapped to hers. Naomi, you said it yourself. He wants a room full of witnesses. Fine, let's give him one. Her voice was steadier than she expected, something hardening underneath the words. The stubborn voice that had been whispering in the back of her mind for months, finally rising up to take the wheel. I have spent my entire life letting rooms full of people decide what I deserve. I am done hiding from rooms. If he wants an audience, he can have one, but it's going to be the worst night of his life, not mine. Taejun looked at her for a long moment, really looked, the way he had that first day in the boutique, like he was seeing something nobody else in any room had ever bothered to notice. You understand what you're asking for, he said quietly. If this goes wrong, it goes wrong in front of everyone. There's no quiet way to undo a public mistake like that. I know, Naomi said. I'm done being quiet anyway. Outside, 9 days away and counting down, the gala invitations were already being printed. Gold script on heavy cream cardstock, addressed to a guest list that had no idea what was about to walk through its doors. A list that included Vivian and the blonde from Larchmont Bridal, and a man named Choi Min-jae who had spent 11 months patiently waiting for exactly this kind of opportunity, and who had absolutely no idea that the woman he intended to use as a weapon had just decided, for the first time in her life, to stop being anyone's victim. The 9 days collapsed into something closer to 4 when Sang-woo called at 6 in the morning with a voice Tae-jun had never heard him use before. Fast, clipped, missing all of his usual control. He moved the timeline up, Sang-woo said. The gala's tonight. They printed new invitations, rushed the venue change, told the columnist circuit it's a last-minute addition to the social calendar before everyone scatters for the season. Min-jae's people leaked it through 3 different gossip accounts in the last 2 hours. By noon, every relevant person in this city will know there's a party tonight and that you're expected to be there with her. Tae-jun was already standing, already reaching for his phone to call Naomi when Sang-woo said the second part, the part that made the floor of the conversation drop out entirely. There's something else. We found the leak. What leak? The photo. The one of her outside her building. It didn't come from outside surveillance. A pause, the kind of pause a man takes when he knows the next sentence is going to detonate something. It came from inside the building's own security system. Someone with access authorized the footage pull. Someone who had your personal codes. Tae-jun's hand went very still around the phone. Say it. June, Sang-woo said. It traces back to June's credentials. Timestamped 2 days before the photo ever reached Min-jae's people. For a long moment, Tae-jun didn't say anything at all. He stood in the middle of his penthouse, phone pressed to his ear, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not the cold, controlled fury he was used to, the kind that let him make decisions with a clear head even while planning violence. This was something messier. Betrayal had a different temperature than danger. Danger, he understood. Betrayal felt like the floor tilting under a house he'd thought was built on solid ground. Bring him to the warehouse, Tae-jun said. Now. Jun was already sitting in a folding chair when Tae-jun arrived. 2 men flanking him, his hands not bound but positioned the way a man holds his hands when he understands, on some animal level, that any sudden movement will be the last decision he ever makes. He looked young in the bad warehouse light, younger than 30, his jaw working, sweat darkening the collar of his shirt despite the concrete cold. Tell me I'm wrong, Tae-jun said, standing several feet away, hands in his pockets, voice level in the way that made the younger men in the room go quiet. Tell me there's an explanation that isn't the one Sang-woo already gave me. Sir, I can explain. That's not what I asked you. I asked you to tell me I'm wrong. Jun's mouth opened, closed. He looked at the floor. You're not wrong, he said finally, voice cracking. Something in Tae-jun's chest went hollow and hot at the same time. Why? He said. Just that. One word, no decoration around it. Because you stopped trusting the people who built this with you the second she walked into your life. Jun's head came up, and underneath the fear there was something else now, something defensive, almost righteous, the particular anger of a young man who'd convinced himself his betrayal was justice. You used to ask my opinion on operations. You used to let me sit in on decisions that mattered. Since the gala, since her, you've been distracted, sir. You missed the supply shipment discrepancy in March because you were at dinner with her. You delayed the Lansing negotiation twice because of her schedule. The men talk. They're scared the organization is becoming an afterthought to whatever this is. So you sold her location to Choi's brother. I didn't think he'd actually use it like this, Jun said, and his voice finally broke completely, the bravado collapsing into something smaller and more pathetic. I thought if there was pressure, real pressure, you'd refocus. You'd remember what actually matters. I never thought he'd go after her directly. I swear to you, I thought it would just be enough to scare you back into what? Tae-jun's voice had dropped to almost nothing now, which was worse than if he'd shouted. Into being the man who doesn't care about anything outside this business? Into being exactly the kind of empty, hollowed-out person my father became before he died alone in a hospital room with nobody who actually loved him sitting beside the bed? Is that the version of me you were trying to protect, June? June didn't answer. He didn't have an answer that would survive being said out loud. Taejun turned away from him, walked to the window overlooking the dark water outside, and stood there for a long moment with his back to the room, his shoulders rigid, every man present understanding that the next thing he said would decide whether June walked out of this warehouse breathing. Sang-woo, he said finally, without turning around. How many people know it was him? 5 of us, the ones in this room. Keep it that way. Taejun turned back, and his face had gone somewhere flat and final, somewhere none of them had seen before. Not rage, which burns hot and eventually exhausts itself, but something colder, something that had already finished deciding and was simply waiting for the room to catch up. He's done. Not killed. I'm not my father, and I'm not going to become him today over a mistake born out of jealousy instead of malice. But he's finished. No severance, no protection, no name attached to this organization ever again. He disappears from every record we have, and if his name surfaces anywhere near my operations again, in any capacity, the leniency I'm showing him today doesn't repeat. June's shoulders sagged with something that might have been relief and might have been the particular grief of a man realizing exactly how much he'd thrown away. Sir, don't, Taejun said. You don't get to thank me. You don't get to explain again. Get him out of my sight. As they walked June toward the loading bay doors, Taejun called after him one more time, voice flat. June! June turned, hope flickering despite himself. The thing you were so afraid I'd lost, Taejun said. Focus. Control. The version of me that puts the organization first, always. No exceptions. He paused. You didn't push me back toward it. You just proved to me exactly how much it's already cost the people I trusted, long before she ever showed up. That's the version of me I'm trying to stop being, not because of her, because of men like you who it produces. June had nothing left to say. He walked out into the gray morning light and didn't look back. Taejun arrived at Naomi's apartment at 8, after almost no sleep, and told her everything. The leaked footage, June's confession. The timeline moved up to tonight, standing in her kitchen with his hands flat on the counter like he needed something solid to hold on to while he talked. Naomi listened without interrupting, arms crossed, her face carefully composed in a way that told him she was working very hard not to fall apart in front of him. So someone on your own side did this, she said when he finished. Someone you trusted. Yes. And you let him walk. I let him live. I didn't let him walk away clean. There's a difference. And most days I'd expect you not to care about the distinction, but I need you to understand that the version of me you fell for only exists because I've spent 11 years deciding, every single day, not to become the kind of man who solves every problem with a body in a river. His voice was rougher than she'd ever heard it. If I'd killed him this morning out of rage, I'd have been doing exactly what he accused me of being too distracted to remember how to do. I'd have proven his point and lost myself doing it. Naomi was quiet for a long moment, processing that, turning it over. Tonight, she said finally. Tell me again exactly what's going to happen tonight. We go to the gala. Min-jae expects a confrontation in front of witnesses, expects to either humiliate you publicly or use the crowd as cover to get close to you. My men will be inside before we arrive. Staff, waitstaff, 2 at the exits, more outside. We control the room before he even walks into it. And if something goes wrong with the plan, then I improvise, and you do exactly what I tell you, the second I tell you, without arguing about it first. He looked at her hard. I mean that, Naomi. Not as control, as survival. Tonight is not the night to decide you've had enough of being told what to do. She held his gaze for a long moment, and something passed between them. Not quite trust, not yet, but something adjacent to it, a willingness to lean into the same direction, even with the ground still shaking underneath both of them. Okay, she said. Okay, I hear you. The Ashford Grand Ballroom was already half full by the time Naomi and Taejun arrived, the room glittering with exactly the kind of casual, generational wealth that made Naomi's skin prickle the second she stepped through the doors. Chandeliers the size of small cars, a champagne tower 3 people had already gathered to photograph, a string quartet working through something somber and expensive sounding, while 200 people pretended not to watch the entrance for exactly the couple everyone had come to see. Naomi wore black, not the soft emerald from the first gala, black, structured, sharp at the shoulders, a dress that didn't ask anyone in that room for permission to exist in it. Taejun walked beside her with his hand resting lightly at the small of her back, and she felt every eye in the room land on them within the first 10 seconds. The particular weight of being watched by people who had already decided what story they wanted to tell about you before you'd said a single word. There, Taejun murmured, barely moving his lips, eyes scanning the room with the kind of casual sweep that looked like idle curiosity to anyone not paying close attention. Far side, near the bar, dark suit, drinking water instead of champagne. That's him. Naomi followed his gaze without turning her head fully, the way he'd coached her to do in the car. Choi Min-jae looked younger than she'd expected, early 30s, lean, handsome in a sharp, calculated way, watching them across the room with an expression of patient, almost friendly interest that made her stomach turn more than open hostility would have. "He looks like he's enjoying himself," Naomi said quietly. "He's been waiting 11 months for this room," Taejun said. "Of course he's enjoying himself." Vivian found them within the first 20 minutes, which Naomi had expected, given that Vivian's husband's hospital foundation had co-sponsored half the gala circuit that season. She approached carefully, almost shyly, none of her usual performance in her posture. "You look beautiful," Vivian said, and for once it didn't sound like a backhanded comment disguised as a compliment. "Naomi, I've been wanting to call you since our fight. I've been thinking about everything you said." "This isn't the time, Viv." "I know, Vivian glanced at Taejun, then back at her sister, something genuinely uncertain in her face for the first time in longer than Naomi could remember. "I'm sorry, I mean it. I've spent so long needing you to be the cautionary tale that I think I forgot you were actually my sister somewhere underneath all that. I don't expect you to forgive me tonight. I just needed you to know I heard you." Naomi felt something soften in her chest despite everything else happening in the room, despite the man across the bar watching them with patient, predatory interest, despite the weight of the entire night still ahead of them. "We'll talk," Naomi said. "After tonight. There's a lot going on right now. Is everything okay?" Vivian's eyes moved between them, picking up on something in the tension neither of them could fully hide. "It will be," Taejun said smoothly, and steered Naomi gently toward the next conversation before Vivian could ask anything further. The first hour passed in careful, controlled small talk, the kind of social choreography Taejun had clearly performed 1,000 times. Easy conversation with men who needed to believe he was simply a successful businessman. Polite distance from women who'd spent the last month mocking Naomi online and were now, in person, suddenly unable to find a single critical word to say. It was the blonde from Larchmont Bridal who broke first. She approached around the 90-minute mark, flanked by the same two friends from the boutique, all three of them dressed in the kind of effortless, expensive clothing that announced old money rather than earned money, and she smiled at Naomi with an expression that didn't reach her eyes. "Naomi, right? We met, well, sort of met, at Larchmont a while back." Her gaze flicked to Taejun with undisguised appraisal. "I had no idea you two were... This is so unexpected." "We've been together for several months," Naomi said evenly. "That's so sweet." The blonde's smile didn't move. "I just have to ask, because everyone's been wondering, what's it like, dating someone so far out of your league? I mean, I don't mean that in a bad way, obviously. I just think it's so inspiring, honestly, that he looks past all of that." The words landed exactly the way they were designed to land, soft enough to deny later, sharp enough to draw blood in the moment. Naomi felt the old, familiar heat rise in her face, the urge to shrink, to laugh it off, to make herself small enough that the comment could slide past without doing any damage. She didn't shrink. "Past all of what exactly?" Naomi said, voice level, almost pleasant. "My weight, my race, my refusal to find your cruelty entertaining. I'd love for you to actually finish that sentence instead of trailing off and hoping I fill in the blank for you." The blonde's smile finally faltered. "I just meant... I know exactly what you meant. You meant it in the fitting room at Larchmont, too, when you laughed at me hard enough that your friend had to look at the floor out of embarrassment for you. The difference is, that day I let you have it. Tonight, I'm not going to." Naomi's voice didn't rise. She'd learned that from watching Taejun all these months, that the quietest voice in a room could carry the most weight if it came from somewhere solid enough. You don't get to dress up contempt as a compliment and expect me to thank you for it. The blonde opened her mouth, found nothing there, and excused herself with her friends a moment later, the three of them retreating toward the bar in a tight, mortified cluster. Taejun, who'd watched the entire exchange without intervening, looked at Naomi with something that wasn't quite a smile, but lived in the same neighborhood as one. "You didn't need me for that one," he said quietly. "No," Naomi said, and felt something settle inside her chest, solid and unfamiliar. "I didn't." It happened during the second hour, right as the orchestra shifted into something slower and the room began drifting toward the dance floor. Naomi felt the change in Taejun before she understood why. His hand resting at her back, going suddenly rigid, his eyes cutting sharp toward the entrance where a small commotion had started near the coat check. She followed his gaze and saw Min-jae moving through the crowd, no longer standing patiently at the bar, but walking directly toward them with the relaxed, confident stride of a man who believed every angle of the room already belonged to him. "Kang Tae-jun," Min-jae said, stopping a few feet away, voice pitched just loud enough to carry to the nearby clusters of guests, who immediately, predictably, turned to listen. "It's been a long time. I almost didn't recognize you. You've gotten so domesticated." "Min-jae." Taejun's voice was perfectly level, perfectly calm, but Naomi felt his hand tighten almost imperceptibly against her back. "You're a long way from home." "So are you, in a manner of speaking." Min-jae's eyes moved to Naomi, slow and deliberate, an inspection that made her skin crawl in a completely different register than the blonde's cruelty had. "This is her, the famous Naomi. I have to say, I expected someone more—" He paused, letting the silence do the work. The same trick the blonde had used an hour earlier, except sharper, more practiced, more dangerous. "Memorable, I suppose, given everything you've apparently risked for her." "Say what you came to say," Taejun said, voice still level, "or leave." "I came to deliver something," Min-jae said, and reached slowly, deliberately into his jacket. Every guard Taejun had stationed in the room tensing in the same half-second, hands twitching toward concealed weapons. But what Min-jae produced was only a phone, screen already lit, already cued to something. "You should see this before you decide how this conversation goes," Min-jae said, and turned the screen toward Taejun. Naomi watched Taejun's face change as he looked at whatever was on that screen, watched the careful composure he'd maintained through everything, through Jun's betrayal, through the leaked photo, through 11 months of patient hunting from a man who wanted him dead, finally crack all the way open into something that looked, for the first time since she'd met him, like genuine shock. "Where did you get this?" Taejun said, voice barely above a whisper now. "Your second-in-command sends his regards," Min-jae said, smiling. "Sang-woo's been very helpful these last few weeks. Did you really think Jun was the only leak in your organization? You found one small fish and assumed you'd solved the problem. The real betrayal was standing right next to you in that warehouse this morning, watching you decide his fate." The room around them seemed to tilt. Naomi felt the floor shift under her feet in a way that had nothing to do with the actual ground. "You're lying," Taejun said, but his voice had lost all its certainty. "Am I?" Min-jae's smile widened. "Ask him yourself. I believe he's standing right behind you." Taejun turned, slowly, and Naomi turned with him, and there, 10 feet away, having just entered the ballroom through a side door that should have been guarded, stood Sang-woo, the man Taejun had trusted for 9 years, the man who'd brought him the news of Jun's betrayal that very morning, the man standing closest to him in every photo, every meeting, every quiet moment of doubt for nearly a decade. Sang-woo's face was unreadable, but his hand, Naomi noticed, was already reaching into his own jacket, and unlike Min-jae's empty gesture a moment earlier, this one didn't produce a phone. Time did the thing it does right before violence. It slowed down and sped up at once, every detail suddenly enormous. The chandelier light catching on the edge of Sang-woo's reaching hand, the orchestra still playing somewhere behind all of it, like the room hadn't noticed the world ending. "Sang-woo," Taejun said, and his voice had gone somewhere Naomi had never heard it go. Not the cold control from the warehouse, not the careful calm from 100 dinners. Something underneath both of those, something that sounded almost like grief arriving early, before the body even understood what it was grieving. 9 years. 11, Sang-woo said. 11 years and you still don't see it. That's the part that almost makes me feel sorry for you. Don't, Taejun said. Don't act like this is a lesson you're teaching me. Tell me what this is. Sang-woo's hand came out of his jacket. Not a phone, a gun, sleek and small, the kind built for close range rather than show, and the room around them finally caught up to what was happening. A woman near the bar screamed. Glasses hit the floor in a chain reaction of panic, champagne flutes shattering against marble, 200 guests discovering all at once that the party they'd attended to gossip about a mismatched couple had become something with actual blood in its future. Everyone stay where you are, Taejun said, loud now, voice cutting through the rising chaos with the particular authority of a man used to being obeyed instantly. Do not run. Running gets people shot. Walk to the walls slowly and stay down. Naomi felt his hand close around her wrist, pulling her half a step behind him, his body angling itself between her and the gun in a motion so fast and so practiced it barely registered as a choice. Just reflex, pure animal protection, the kind of thing a body does before the mind has time to weigh the cost. You're going to want to hear this part, Min-jae said, stepping back, putting distance between himself and the gun with the casual, unbothered movement of a man who'd planned for exactly this moment and had no intention of getting his own hands dirty in it. Sang-woo's brother was in the Busan warehouse. 11 months ago. The one you burned to the ground clearing out my brother's network. Taejun's jaw tightened. I didn't know there was a brother in that building. No, Sang-woo said, voice cracking now, the gun trembling slightly in his hand. You didn't know. You never asked. You gave the order, you walked away, and you let other men clean up the consequences while you went home and slept fine. Hyun-soo was 22. He wasn't even part of the operation. He was visiting. He made one bad choice to be in the wrong building on the wrong night, and you burned it down without ever once checking who might be inside. Sang-woo. Taejun's voice had gone soft, almost pleading, a register Naomi had never once heard from him, not even in the privacy of her own kitchen. If I'd known, you'd have done it anyway, Sang-woo said. We both know that. You'd have made the same call because the organization comes first, because it always comes first. You taught me that yourself. I just decided I was done living by a rule that cost me my brother and never once cost you anything. So you sold me to Choi's people, to the man whose organization I dismantled because his brother had already killed 4 of our own men first. Taejun's voice climbed slightly now, the first crack of real heat breaking through the careful calm. You know what they are, Sang-woo. You were there for the bodies they left in the harbor in 2019. You're handing me to the same kind of people who did that, over a grief I never even knew I'd caused you. Grief doesn't care whose fault it actually is, Sang-woo said. It just needs somewhere to go. The gun came up. What happened next took 4 seconds, though it would live in Naomi's memory for the rest of her life, as something closer to 4 minutes. Every motion stretched, magnified, burned into permanent detail. Taejun moved first, shoving Naomi hard to the side, away from the direct line of fire, and she stumbled into a cluster of fleeing guests and went down onto one knee on the marble, the impact jarring up through her hip, her palms scraping raw against the floor. The gun fired. The sound was enormous in the enclosed ballroom, far louder than anything she'd imagined gunfire would sound like, a flat, ugly crack that seemed to suck all the air out of the room at once. Taejun didn't go down. The bullet caught him along the outside of his shoulder, tearing through fabric and flesh in a spray that bloomed dark and fast across the white of his shirt, and he staggered half a step, but stayed upright, already moving, already closing the distance to Sang-woo before the man could recalibrate his aim. 2 of Taejun's men converged from opposite sides of the room at the same instant, the ones disguised as catering staff, dropping trays, drawing weapons of their own, and the ballroom dissolved fully into chaos, guests screaming and scrambling for exits, the orchestra finally, belatedly, stopping mid-phrase, instruments clattering to the floor as musicians dove for cover. "Naomi, move!" Taejun shouted, not looking back at her, his focus entirely locked on Sang-woo as the 2 men collided, grappling for control of the gun between them, their bodies slamming into a serving table that collapsed under the impact, ice sculptures and champagne flutes crashing down around them in a glittering, dangerous spray. Naomi scrambled backward on her hands, away from the fight, her heart slamming so hard against her ribs it felt like it might crack something. and she found herself pressed against the base of a marble column with two other terrified guests, one of them sobbing openly, the other frozen completely still in shock. She looked for Vivian and couldn't find her in the chaos, panic spiking through the fear already flooding her system, until she caught a glimpse of her sister being half-dragged toward a side exit by one of Tae-jun's security men, Vivian's face white with terror, her husband's hand locked around her wrist. Good, Naomi thought. Get out. Get somewhere safe. The fight between Tae-jun and Sang-woo had moved across the floor now, knocking over an entire table of seated guests who hadn't moved fast enough. And Naomi watched in horror as Sang-woo got a knee into Tae-jun's wounded shoulder, driving a fresh wave of blood through the fabric, Tae-jun's face contorting with a pain he refused to make any sound about, his teeth gritted, his hand still locked around Sang-woo's wrist, fighting for control of the weapon between them. "You don't have to do this," Tae-jun ground out, voice strained, blood now running freely down his arm, dripping in fat dark drops onto the white marble floor. "Whatever I owe you for Hyunsu, I'll pay it. Money, position, anything. Just not like this. I don't want your money." Sang-woo's voice broke completely now, tears mixing with the sweat on his face, his grip on the gun shaking with something that looked less like rage and more like a man finally collapsing under a weight he'd been carrying silently for 11 months. "I want my brother back. You can't give me that. Nobody can give me that. So I'm just going to take something from you instead." His eyes flicked, for just a fraction of a second, toward where Naomi crouched against the column. Tae-jun saw the look, understood it instantly, and in the half-second that followed, he made a choice that would have been unthinkable to him 11 months earlier, a choice no rational head of an organization built on calculation and control would ever sanction. He released his grip on Sang-woo's gun hand entirely, throwing himself bodily between the weapon and the direction Sang-woo's eyes had just betrayed, putting his own chest directly into the path of a bullet that hadn't even fired yet. The gun went off again. This time Naomi screamed, a sound torn out of her without permission, raw and animal, as she watched Tae-jun's body jerk backward, his hand flying to his side, dark red already spreading fast across his shirt in a second wound that bloomed even faster than the first. He didn't fall immediately. He stood there for one impossible, suspended second, swaying, his face gone gray, his eyes finding Naomi's across the chaos of the ballroom with an expression that looked less like pain and more like apology. Then his knees buckled, and he went down hard onto the marble, blood pooling fast and dark beneath him, and the entire room seemed to scream at once. Naomi didn't remember deciding to move. One moment she was crouched against the column, frozen. The next she was crawling, then running, shoving past fleeing guests and overturned chairs, dropping to her knees beside him in a slide that tore her dress and scraped both palms raw against the marble, her hands immediately, instinctively pressing down hard against the wound in his side, feeling the hot, wet slick of his blood soaking instantly through her fingers. "No, no, no, stay with me, do you hear me? Look at me!" Her voice came out in fragments, barely words at all, her hand shaking so hard she could barely maintain the pressure he needed. "You don't get to do this. You don't get to almost tell me everything and then leave before you finish." Tae-jun's eyes found her face, unfocused, glassy, his breathing gone shallow and wet-sounding in a way that terrified her more than the blood did. "Naomi," he said, the word barely audible, more breath than sound. "Don't talk. Save it. Save everything. Just breathe. Just keep breathing." Behind her, the fight between Sang-woo and Tae-jun's two remaining men had reached its own brutal conclusion. One of Tae-jun's soldiers took a bullet to the leg and went down screaming, but the second managed to close the distance and slam Sang-woo's gun hand against the edge of an overturned table hard enough to break something, the weapon skittering away across the marble floor. Sang-woo, disarmed, didn't try to run. He simply stood there in the wreckage of the ballroom, chest heaving, tears streaking through the sweat on his face, looking down at Tae-jun's bleeding body with an expression that had nothing left in it. Not triumph, not relief, just emptiness. "Is this what you wanted?" Naomi screamed at him, not looking up from where her hands fought to keep pressure on the wound, blood pulsing warm and insistent against her palms with every labored heartbeat. "Look at him. Look at what you did. Does it feel like justice? Does it feel like Hyunsu would have wanted this?" Sang-woo didn't answer. He sank slowly to his knees in the wreckage, hands empty, and didn't resist when Taejun's man came forward to restrain him. Min-jae was already gone, slipped out during the chaos, his job apparently done, the bloodshed he'd engineered now playing out exactly as planned without him needing to risk a single hair on his own head. And Naomi understood, in some distant, horrified corner of her mind, that this hadn't been an ending. It had been exactly what he wanted: a wounded king, a broken inner circle, a city about to learn that Kang Taejun could bleed like anyone else. "Someone call an ambulance!" Naomi screamed at the room. At anyone, her voice cracking apart with the effort. "Please, somebody, he needs a hospital. He's losing too much blood." "No hospital." Taejun's hand found her wrist, weak but insistent, his grip a fraction of what it had been only minutes earlier. "Hospital reports gunshot wounds. Police, press. It exposes everything. You, the organization, all of it. Can't." "I don't care about exposing anything. I care about you not dying on this floor." "Min-ho," Taejun managed, eyes fluttering, fighting to stay focused on her face. "Call him. Private doctor. 20 minutes out. I just need—" His breath caught, a wet, terrible sound. "I just need to last 20 minutes. Naomi looked down at her hands, soaked dark red, at the growing pool spreading beneath him on the white marble, at the gray, sweat-slicked color of his face, and understood with a clarity that felt like its own kind of violence that 20 minutes was an impossibly long time to ask a body to hold itself together when it had already decided on some cellular level to start shutting down. "Stay awake," she said, voice shaking, pressing harder against the wound despite his sharp, gasping wince of pain. "Look at me. You don't get to close your eyes. Not yet. Taejun, look at me." His eyes were already starting to drift, the lids heavy, his breathing gone shallow and fast in the particular rhythm she'd later learn was the body's last desperate attempt to keep enough oxygen moving through a system rapidly losing the blood needed to carry it. "Stay with me," Naomi said again, louder now, almost a command, the same stubborn voice that had told a room full of cruel strangers exactly what she thought of them, less than 2 hours earlier, rising up now to fight something far more dangerous than gossip. "I didn't survive my entire life waiting for someone who actually sees me just to lose him on a ballroom floor. Do you hear me? You don't get to do that to me." His lips moved. No sound came out. His eyes closed. "No, oh, no." Naomi's voice broke completely, and somewhere behind her the wail of distant sirens finally began cutting through the screams and chaos of the ruined gala. Too far away, she was sure, impossibly far away. And she bent low over him, hands still pressed hard into the wound, blood soaking through the ruined black fabric of her dress. And she said his name one more time, quieter now, almost a prayer she didn't have words for, into the sudden and terrible silence where his breathing should have been. The silence lasted 4 seconds. Naomi would never forget that it was exactly 4 seconds, the same count she'd used her whole life to ration her own grief behind dressing room curtains, because somewhere in the middle of those 4 seconds, her entire understanding of fairness collapsed and rebuilt itself around one single animal fact. He was not allowed to die on this floor. Then his chest rose, shallow, ragged, but real. "He's breathing," she said, to no one, to everyone, her voice cracking apart with something that wasn't quite relief. Not yet, because breathing wasn't the same as living, not with this much blood already gone, soaked black into white marble, soaked into the ruined silk of her dress. "He's breathing. Stay with me. Stay with me." The doors at the far end of the ballroom burst open and Min-ho came through first, 3 men behind him, and behind them a 4th man Naomi didn't recognize carrying a hard case the size of a small suitcase, moving with the brisk, unhurried efficiency of someone who had done this exact walk into exactly this kind of chaos more than once before. "Move," the man said, dropping to his knees on Taejun's other side, already snapping open the case, already pulling gloves on with the kind of speed that looked careless but wasn't. "Hands stay where they are. Don't let up the pressure. You're doing the right thing. Don't change anything yet." "Are you a doctor?" Naomi said, the words tumbling out of her on instinct, needing to know, needing some structure to hold on to. "Trauma surgeon. Used to work ER. Now I work for people who can't walk into an ER." He was already cutting away fabric, assessing the wound with quick clinical fingers, his face giving away nothing. "Entry here, no exit that I can see, which means the bullet's still in there." I need him on a table in the next 10 minutes or he bleeds out before I can do anything that matters." "Then take him," Naomi said. "Now, whatever you need, just take him." They lifted him onto a stretcher that appeared from somewhere, moving with brutal practice speed, and Naomi walked beside it the entire way out through a service corridor that smelled like bleach and old carpet, her hand never leaving his, blood drying tacky and dark across her fingers. And she didn't let herself cry. Not yet, because some old 4-second rule in her had finally outgrown its limit, and she understood, walking beside a dying man through a service hallway, that grief on a schedule was a luxury for people whose worst day hadn't actually arrived yet. The private medical suite Min-ho drove them to wasn't a hospital. It was a converted floor of an unmarked building in a part of the city Naomi had never had reason to visit, sterile and quiet, the kind of place built specifically for men who couldn't afford the paper trail of an emergency room. And Naomi sat in a hard plastic chair outside a set of double doors for 3 hours, while machines beeped somewhere on the other side, and her own hands, scrubbed raw in a bathroom sink down the hall, still smelled faintly of copper, no matter how many times she washed them. Vivian found her there an hour in, mascara-streaked, shoes gone, having clearly fought her own way back into the building against her husband's wishes. "I had to come," Vivian said, sitting down hard in the chair beside her, not waiting for permission. "I couldn't go home and pretend the night ended normally." Naomi didn't answer right away. She stared at the double doors at the small rectangular window cut into them, fogged with condensation from whatever was happening inside. "He threw himself in front of a bullet for me," she said finally, "twice, in the same 5 minutes, like it wasn't even a decision, like his body decided before his brain had time to weigh anything." "That's not normal," Vivian said quietly. "That's not what most men do, Naomi. I need you to actually hear that, separate from everything else happening tonight. I know. I watched you run toward him, through actual gunfire. You didn't even hesitate." Vivian's voice wobbled. "I've spent my whole life thinking I was the brave one in this family because I knew how to walk into a room and own it. I watched you tonight, and I understood I don't actually know the first thing about courage." Naomi finally turned to look at her sister. This woman who had spent 3 decades performing a particular kind of cruelty disguised as concern, sitting now with her makeup ruined and her shoes gone and nothing left to perform. "I forgive you," Naomi said. "Not because tonight earned it, because I'm tired of carrying it, and because some stranger taught me, completely by accident, that I'm allowed to decide what I keep holding on to and what I finally put down." She exhaled, long and slow. "I'm putting it down, Viv. The boutique, the texts, all of it. I need my sister, not my judge, and I think for the first time in a long time, I actually believe you want to be that for me." Vivian started crying then, the real kind, not the performative kind Naomi had spent a lifetime learning to detect, and she reached over and took Naomi's hand, the one still faintly stained at the knuckles no matter how hard she'd scrubbed, and held it without saying anything else, because for once, there was nothing left that needed saying. The surgeon came out a little after 1 in the morning, peeling off bloodied gloves, exhaustion carved deep into his face. "He's stable?" he said, before Naomi could even stand up fully. "Bullet missed the artery by about 1/2 centimeter. 1/2 centimeter with this kind of wound is the difference between a hard recovery and a funeral. He's going to need weeks, not days, and he's going to fight me on every single one of them, because men like him always do. But he's going to live." Naomi's knees buckled, and Vivian caught her before she hit the floor, and for the first time since the ballroom, since the gun, since the sound of 2 bodies slamming into a serving table, Naomi let herself cry the way she hadn't cried since she was a child, without counting the seconds, without rationing it, without any rule at all governing how long grief or relief or whatever this enormous unnamed thing was got to last. "Can I see him?" she asked, once she could speak again. "He's sedated. He won't wake for hours, but yes." They let her sit beside the bed in a small recovery room with low light and the steady mechanical rhythm of monitors, and she held his hand, the same hand that had gripped Sang-woo's wrist over a gun, the same hand that had once handed her a cup of tea she hadn't asked for but always wanted. And she watched his chest rise and fall, slow and even now, no longer the terrible shallow gasping from the ballroom floor. And she let herself finally believe that the worst night of her life had ended without taking the one person who'd made all the other nights bearable. He woke 2 days later, late afternoon light slanting gold through the blinds, And the first thing he did, before he even fully opened his eyes, was reach for her hand, like some part of him had been tracking her location the entire time he was unconscious and simply needed confirmation that it was still true. "You're here," he said, voice wrecked, barely above a whisper. "Where else would I be? I thought—" He stopped, swallowed, tried again. "In the ballroom, before everything went dark. I thought that was it. I thought I'd die before I finished telling you the truth, and you'd spend the rest of your life only knowing half of who I was." "You told me enough," Naomi said. "The rest I figured out watching you take a bullet for me without blinking." He managed a small, pained laugh, which turned into a wince, which turned into her hand pressing gently against his chest, telling him without words to stop moving, stop talking, just breathe. "Sang-woo," he said eventually, when the pain had settled. "He's alive. Your men have him somewhere. I didn't ask where. And honestly, I don't think I want to know." Tae-jun was quiet for a long moment, staring at the ceiling, something working behind his eyes that looked less like anger now and more like grief catching up to him in slow, delayed waves. "I gave the order that killed his brother," he said finally. "I never even knew Hyun-soo's name until tonight. 11 years running this organization, and I never once asked who might be standing in a building before I decided to burn it down. That's not the kind of mistake you fix by being merciful to the man who tried to kill you over it. That's the kind of mistake you have to actually change something about, or it just happens again to someone else's brother in some other warehouse. What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet, but I know what I'm not going to do anymore." He turned his head, slow, careful, and looked at her with an exhaustion that went deeper than the wound in his side. "I'm not going to keep telling myself the organization comes first, no exceptions, the way my father taught me. That rule cost me Sang-woo. It almost cost me you. I think it's been costing me pieces of myself for 11 years, and I was too busy being good at it to notice." Naomi didn't say anything. She just held his hand and let the silence between them hold the weight of a decision neither of them needed to rush. The recovery took 6 weeks, and somewhere in the middle of it, the city's gossip machine, the same accounts that had spent months mocking Naomi's body, speculating about a bet or a joke or some explanation more palatable than the truth, finally got hold of a version of events distorted enough through rumor and retelling that it barely resembled what had actually happened, but distorted in Naomi's favor for once. A businessman shot protecting his girlfriend at a charity gala. A woman who ran toward gunfire instead of away from it. The narrative shifted, fast and fickle the way these things always did, and Naomi found herself, for the first time in her adult life, the subject of public conversation that didn't make her want to disappear. She didn't read most of it. She'd learned, finally, that other people's opinions of her were a tide she didn't have to swim out into anymore. The blonde from Larchmont sent a message through a mutual acquaintance. Some clumsy, half-apologetic thing about not having known the full context, about wanting to clear the air. Naomi never responded. Some apologies arrived too late to matter, and she'd decided she no longer owed anyone the effort of pretending otherwise. Deborah, the saleswoman, she never heard from again, which felt right. Some people simply existed in your story long enough to teach you something and then exited it for good. No further scene required. Vivian called every few days, sometimes just to talk, sometimes to ask after Tae-jun's recovery. And twice she showed up at Naomi's apartment with takeout and sat on the couch and just existed there, quietly, without performing anything, which was its own kind of repair. Not grand, not dramatic, just steady, accumulating proof that something had actually changed. Tae-jun made 3 decisions in the weeks following the shooting, each one harder than the last. The first was Sang-woo. He didn't have him killed. He didn't have him punished in any of the ways the organization's old, unwritten rules would have demanded for an attempt on the boss's life. Instead, he arranged, quietly, through channels that would never appear in any official record, for Sang-woo to disappear entirely from the criminal world, relocated under a different name to a small coastal town outside the reach of either organization, with enough resources to start something ordinary and small, a life built around grief instead of vengeance. "You're not going to forgive him," Naomi said when he told her. "No," Tae-jun said. "I'm not. But I understand him now in a way I didn't before, and understanding someone doesn't require forgiving them. It just requires admitting they were made out of the same broken material everyone else is made of, and that under the wrong amount of pressure, in the wrong order of events, that material breaks the same way in anyone. The second decision took longer and cost more. Taejun spent weeks restructuring the parts of his organization that ran on violence first and calculation second, pulling back from operations that had nothing left to do with protecting dock workers and everything to do with old grudges and territory that no longer needed defending the way it once had. He didn't dismantle everything. Some truths about who he was, what he controlled, what it cost to control it, weren't going away simply because he wanted to be a different man for the woman he loved. But he made the organization smaller, quieter, harder to provoke, into the kind of mistake that had cost a 22-year-old his life in a Busan warehouse 11 months before Naomi ever walked into a bridal boutique. The third decision he made standing in Naomi's kitchen, 3 months after the shooting, his shoulder still stiff, a scar along his ribs that would never fully fade, holding a small velvet box he'd been carrying around in his coat pocket for almost 2 weeks without finding the right moment. "I'm not going to do this with some elaborate plan," he said, before she'd even noticed the box. "I had ideas. A restaurant. A view. Something with more ceremony than my kitchen, your kitchen, at 9 in the morning while you're still in pajamas. But I've spent enough of my life calculating the perfect moment for things, and most of the time the moment finds you instead, whether you're ready for the ceremony or not." Naomi set down her coffee cup very slowly. "Taejun, you watched the worst version of who I am," he said. "The blood, the betrayal, the 11 years of decisions I'm not proud of. You ran toward it instead of away from it, and then you held my hand in a recovery room for 2 days waiting for me to wake up. And somewhere in the middle of all that, I understood there isn't going to be a version of my life that doesn't have you standing inside it." He opened the box. The ring was simple, understated, nothing like the gaudy displays of wealth she'd half expected from a man with his resources. "I'm not asking you to fix me, or to save me from what I am. I'm asking you to keep choosing me anyway, the way I've been choosing you since the second I saw you in that boutique and couldn't make myself look away." Naomi looked at the ring, then at him, at the scar she knew was hidden beneath his shirt, at the tired, hopeful, unguarded expression on a face that had spent 11 years learning not to be unguarded around anyone. "Yes," she said, and the word came out steadier than she expected, steadier than anything she'd said in that boutique dressing room months earlier, steadier than anything Vivian's cruelty or the internet's mockery had ever managed to shake loose from her. "Yes." The wedding happened 7 months later, in early autumn, in a garden venue outside the city that Naomi had chosen herself, specifically because it had nothing gold-trimmed about it, nothing that echoed the boutique where this entire story had started. She wore a dress she had designed herself, working with a small, independent seamstress instead of any luxury boutique, fitted to her exact body, instead of forcing her body to apologize for not fitting some standard-size chart. It fit perfectly the first time she tried it on, not because her body had changed in the months since Larchmont, but because she'd finally stopped looking for a dress that required her to change. Vivian stood beside her as she got ready, hands steady now in a way they hadn't been steady in years, helping with the last clasps of the dress. And when she finished, she stepped back and looked at her sister in the mirror, both of them seeing the same reflection for what felt like the first time in their lives. "You look exactly like yourself," Vivian said. "Not a thinner version, not a prettier version, just you, finally not apologizing for it." "I learned that from a man who survives by reading rooms," Naomi said, smiling. "Turns out he taught me to read my own first." The ceremony itself was small by the standards of the gala circuit that had once mocked her. A few dozen guests, none of the blondes from Larchmont, none of the columnists who'd once treated her relationship as gossip fodder. But Taejun's men stood quietly at the edges of the garden anyway, dressed for once not as soldiers but as guests, a small army of careful, watchful loyalty dressed up in suits instead of weapons, because some truths about Naomi's life weren't going away just because the worst of the danger had passed. When she walked down the aisle, she didn't look at any of them. She looked at Taejun, standing at the end of it in a simple dark suit, no tie, the same effortless elegance she'd noticed across a crowded ballroom the night they'd properly met. And she watched his face as she approached, watched the careful composure he wore for the rest of the world, fall away completely the closer she got, until by the time she reached him, there was nothing left on his face but the same unguarded attention he'd given her in a boutique fitting room months before. Either of them understood what it would cost or what it would save. "You came a long way to get here," he said quietly, taking both her hands. "So did you," she said. "The world kept telling you to become someone else," he said, his voice carrying just far enough for the small gathered crowd to hear, no further, no performance in it at all. "I fell in love with the woman you already were, long before you believed she was worth choosing." Naomi felt the tears come, and this time she didn't count them, didn't ration them, didn't give herself a 4-second limit before forcing her face back into something composed and acceptable for public consumption. She let them fall, openly, in front of everyone who'd ever doubted that a woman like her could be loved exactly as she was, and nobody laughed. Months after the wedding, Naomi stood in front of a different bridal boutique. Not Larchmont. Somewhere smaller, quieter, run by a woman who'd built her business specifically around bodies. The rest of the industry refused to dress, helping a nervous young bride who reminded her, in small painful ways, of herself a year earlier, anxious about a zipper that wouldn't close, anxious about a room that might laugh. "It's going to fit," Naomi told her, kneeling to adjust the hem, looking up at the young woman's frightened face. "And if for some reason it doesn't fit today, that's not a verdict on you. That's just fabric. You're not the one who needs to change to deserve something beautiful." The young woman blinked back tears, nodded, and straightened her shoulders the way Naomi remembered straightening her own, once, in a different mirror, in a different life that felt impossibly far away now. Outside in the gray afternoon light, Tae-jun waited by the car, his shoulder fully healed now, except for the ache that came with cold weather. The scar at his ribs a permanent reminder of a night neither of them would ever fully stop carrying. He watched through the boutique window as his wife knelt beside a stranger, patient and steady, offering exactly the kindness nobody had offered her when she'd needed it most. And he thought, not for the first time, that he had spent 11 years believing strength meant never bleeding in public, never showing the soft, breakable parts of himself to anyone who might use them against him. Naomi had taught him something different, that real strength wasn't the absence of softness. It was choosing, deliberately, again and again, to protect the soft things the world insisted on mocking, in herself, in strangers, in a man whose hands had done terrible things and who had finally, slowly, found his way toward doing something better with them instead. She came out of the boutique a few minutes later, sunlight catching gold in her hair, and slid into the car beside him, and he reached over and took her hand the way he had 100 times since the ballroom, the way he intended to keep doing for the rest of whatever life they had left to build together. "Ready to go home?" he asked. "Yeah," Naomi said, and meant it completely, the word carrying none of the old fear, none of the old bracing for a laugh that never came again. "I'm ready." The car pulled away from the curb, leaving the boutique behind, leaving behind every room that had ever laughed, every sister who'd ever needed her to stay small, every stranger who'd ever decided her body was the price of admission for love, leaving all of it exactly where it belonged, in the past, while the woman who'd once hidden 4 seconds of tears behind a dressing room curtain drove off into a life nobody had ever told her she deserved, and which she had, finally, chosen for herself anyway.